It started with a sound I hadn't heard in years. A sharp, heavy crack somewhere deep in the woods behind my cabin. The kind of sound that cuts through wind and rain like a bone snapping in your own body. I was on the porch, sipping stale coffee, watching a spring storm roll over the mountain ridge. When it came, I froze. You live long enough up here, you learn to read the forest. This was not a branch falling. It was something alive. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and the old Remington. Not because I intended to use it, but because around here, walking into the forest unarmed is like walking into a bar fight with your hands in your pockets. I headed toward the sound. The ground was soaked. Mud sucked at my boots with every step. Fallen pine needles clung to my jeans. It took me 20 minutes of climbing, stumbling, and slipping through the underbrush before I saw it. At the base of a steep slope, right where a narrow logging trail had collapsed under the weight of runoff, was the wreckage of what used to be a den. Broken branches, uprooted soil, patches of fur, and in the middle of it a bear, a full-grown female, breathing barely. My first instinct was to back away. You don't just walk up to a wounded bear. But then I heard a sound that chilled me deeper than the rain ever could. A whimper, high-pitched, close. I squinted through the mist and saw it. A tiny cub, no bigger than a beagle, half buried under damp leaves. Its eyes wide and panicked, making this helpless, desperate sound that I still hear when the house goes too quiet. I didn't think. I just moved. I slid down the slope, landing on one knee, hand out, murmuring soft nonsense like I was talking to a skittish dog. The mother raised her head slightly. Her eyes locked onto mine, glassy and dazed but full of something ancient. Not anger, not fear, pain. She didn't growl. She didn't move. She was done. The cub squirmed as I freed it from the leaves. It was cold, shaking. I tucked it under my coat without thinking and looked back at the mother. I swear, in that moment, she blinked at me like she was giving permission. I stood there, soaked and breathless, heart racing. The weight of a new life pressed against my ribs. I had a choice to make, and I already knew what it was. I couldn't leave her. So I ran back to the cabin, grabbed my old tarp, a broken-down sled from the shed, and every strap and rope I could find. I dragged it all back up the trail, hands raw, lungs on fire. I wrapped the bear the best I could. She didn't resist. She barely breathed. It took me over an hour to haul her back, the cub still inside my coat, whimpering now and then like it knew its mother was slipping away. Twice I fell. Once I thought I dislocated my shoulder. But I kept going. By the time we reached the cabin, the storm had passed, but my body was shaking harder than the windows in the wind. I cleared out the woodshed, laid her on hay and old blankets, and put the cub beside her. She made a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl. Something softer. I sat down on the floor, muddy, bleeding, cursing myself. Who the hell did I think I was, playing forest doctor? Then the cub pressed its nose to her neck and curled up beside her. And I knew. It wasn't about thinking anymore. It was about not letting them die alone. That night I barely slept. I kept checking on them, changing the soaked blankets, making sure the cub stayed warm. At one point, I thought she'd stopped breathing. I panicked, spilled water all over trying to clean a wound I didn't know how to treat. But she held on. Morning came slow. I called the local vet. He told me it was illegal to keep a wild animal on your property, that I could get fined, or worse. So I lied. I said it was a stray dog. He didn't come. I hung up, looked out the window. The sun was breaking through the clouds, and I made a decision. If no one was coming to help, then I would have to do it myself. Somehow. By mid-morning, I had her drinking water from a bowl. Just a few sips, but it was enough to keep hope alive. The cub wouldn't leave her side, except to climb awkwardly onto my lap, while I tried to Google how to treat infected wounds on wild animals. It was ridiculous. I knew it, but it was the only thing I had. The shed was barely holding together. Old wood, rusted hinges, a leaky roof. I pushed aside the tools and bags of fertilizer to make space, spread more hay and wrapped extra blankets around them. If anyone saw what I was doing, I could be in serious trouble. But I couldn't stop now. I tried calling the animal control office again, then a private vet in the next town. One clinic transferred me twice and then hung up. Another one just said, "Sorry, we can't treat wildlife," and ended the call. It was the third call that really hit me. "Look, I'm not risking my license over a bear," the woman said flatly. "You want help? Call Fish and Wildlife." I knew what that meant. If I called them, they'd come with tranquilizers and rifles. If the bear was too injured to be released, they'd euthanize her on the spot. And the cub? Probably taken to some underfunded rehab center where it wouldn't survive a month. I hung up without a word. The cub stared at me from under the blanket, eyes full of questions. I didn't have answers. That afternoon, I drove into town, left the cub curled up in a basket lined with flannel. The mother still hadn't stood. Her breathing was shallow. I left the shed door cracked for air and prayed no one would wander up. I parked behind the pharmacy, out of sight, and walked into the back entrance of the small clinic where I used to bring my dog. Inside, I saw him, the new guy, young, maybe mid-20s. He wore a wrinkled white coat and had a coffee stain on the pocket. He was loading supplies into a cupboard. "You treat animals?" I asked. He looked up. Yeah, mostly dogs and cats." I lowered my voice. "What about a bear?" He laughed like it was a joke. But I didn't blink. His smile faded. "You serious?" I nodded. "A mother, wounded, with a cub. They won't survive the night." He hesitated. I could see the gears turning. Then he said, "Wait here." He came back 5 minutes later with a small kit bag. "I can't bring anything that gets logged. And if anyone asks, I was never here." I drove him up the mountain road, silent the whole way. The truck bounced over potholes. Branches scraped the windows. He kept glancing at me like he wasn't sure if I was insane or heroic. Maybe both. At the cabin, I led him straight to the shed. He stopped cold when he saw her. "Holy hell," he whispered. "You weren't kidding." He knelt beside her, set down the kit, and began cleaning the wounds. I watched his hands. They were steady, but his eyes betrayed the fear. The cub whimpered when he touched the mother's leg. She stirred but didn't lash out. "This one's deep," he said. "Infected. She's dehydrated, and there's swelling around the ribcage. Might be internal bleeding. Can you help her?" "I can try." He gave her fluids, antibiotics, cleaned and dressed the wounds, and injected something to ease the pain. He even checked the cub. "This little guy's in better shape than she is. Probably still nursing." He stayed for almost 2 hours. When we stepped outside, he lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You're lucky she didn't rip your arm off," he said. "I didn't give her a reason." He stared at the treetops for a moment, then said, "If anyone finds out, I lose my job." "No one will." He nodded and handed me the rest of the meds. "Change the dressing daily. If she makes it through the next 3 days, she might have a shot." He left without another word. That night, I kept the lantern burning. I read by the shed door. Every hour, I checked her breathing. The cub curled beside her, rising and falling with each breath. But the silence didn't last long. 2 days later, I heard engines on the road. Not one, but 3. I looked through the curtain. Old pickups. One of them belonged to Russ Kramer, a local trapper who never met a regulation he didn't ignore. I stepped outside before they could knock. "Heard some noises up here," Russ said. "Couple of us figured we'd check it out." "You're not supposed to be hunting this close to the ridge." "Not hunting, just curious. Folks say you've been acting strange." My pulse spiked. "That right?" Another guy spoke up. "You seen anything out here? Bear sign?" I shook my head. "Nothing but raccoons and my own shadow." They lingered. One of them walked toward the back of the cabin. "Shed locked?" Russ asked. "It is, and it's staying that way." "Why so tense, old man?" "Because you weren't invited." They finally backed off, but not before one of them spit near my boots and muttered something about calling fish and wildlife. I waited till they were out of sight before checking the shed. The cub was asleep. The mother looked worse. Her breathing was ragged, and she didn't respond to my voice. I sat down beside her and whispered, "You don't get to die. Not yet. Not like this." I stayed there till dawn. I was chopping firewood when I heard the tires crunch over gravel. Not one car. 2. A black SUV with government plates and a white pickup with the state seal half-worn on the door. My stomach turned before the engines even stopped. They didn't knock. 2 men in dark windbreakers stepped out, badges already dangling around their necks like anchors. "Mr. Harris?" the taller one called. "Wildlife enforcement. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" They were already halfway up the steps. "What's this about?" I asked, wiping my hands on my jeans. "We received a tip about illegal harboring of wildlife on private property," he said flatly. The other guy scanned the tree line like he was expecting a grizzly to pop out and wave. "A tip, huh? Let me guess. Russ Kramer." "Can't say, but we do take these things seriously." They asked to look around. I said no. They asked again, more firmly. Do you have a warrant? No, sir. But refusal will be noted in our report. They circled the house anyway. I stayed on the porch, watching their every step. When they paused at the woodshed, I tensed. Locked, one of them said. Got old tools in there, I replied. Haven't opened it in years. They looked at each other. Then one turned back to me. We can come back. With paper. I nodded. You do that. They left with practiced politeness, but I could feel the threat trailing behind them like exhaust. I waited 5 minutes, then ran to the shed. She was awake, barely. Her eyes fluttered when I opened the door. The cub stirred in the blankets but didn't lift his head. That scared me more than anything. He had been so alert, so clingy. Now he was limp, breathing fast and shallow. I touched his fur. Warm, but not enough. I didn't have a thermometer. I just knew. Something was wrong. I called the kid from the clinic again. Straight to voicemail. Tried twice more. Nothing. I wrapped the cub in my thickest jacket, tucked him against my chest, and whispered, Hold on, buddy. Then I looked at her. Her wound was leaking again, and her breathing was ragged. Couldn't wait. If they came back with a warrant, it would be over. I loaded them both into the back of the truck. I built a nest of blankets and hay, tied down a tarp over the bed to keep the wind out, and I drove, upward, into the mountains. The old road twisted like a snake. Steep cliffs, blind turns, landslides waiting to happen. I took it anyway. My plan? I didn't have one. There was an abandoned ranger station about 30 miles in. No power, no cell signal, but maybe a place to hide, to rest, to buy some time. Every bump in the road made me flinch. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting flashing lights. Instead, I saw the cub, barely moving. His tiny paw twitched once, then went still. A memory hit me like a hammer. It was 5 years ago. Different road, different rainstorm. My truck. My son. I had taken my eyes off the road for maybe 3 seconds. Just enough to adjust the radio. That was all it took. The guardrail hadn't held. The truck rolled. I crawled out with a broken arm and a lifetime of guilt. He didn't crawl out at all. And now here I was, careening through the same mountains with another fragile life slipping through my fingers. I slammed the brakes, got out, climbed into the bed. The mother opened her eyes, barely. The cub wasn't moving. Don't you dare, I said. My voice cracked. I shook him gently. You don't get to give up. Not after all this. No response. I pressed my ear to his chest. Faint, quick beats. Still there. I rubbed his back. Blew warm air against his fur. Dug through the supplies and found a heating pad from the vet kit. Clicked the metal disc to activate it and wrapped it around him. I stayed there in the back of that truck for an hour. Rain drizzled. Wind howled through the canyon. And slowly the cub whimpered. Once. Then again. I cried. Not loud. Just enough to feel the salt on my lips. By dusk, we reached the old ranger station. Boarded windows. Half a roof. I kicked the door in. Inside, I set them down gently. Lit a fire in the old stove. Fed it paper, twigs, anything I could find. She watched me, her eyes clearer than before. Still weak but aware. The cub snuggled against her. I lost one boy already, I whispered. Not again. She blinked once. Closed her eyes. I stayed up all night feeding that fire. Outside, the first snow of spring began to fall. I woke up with a start. The fire had burned low, barely embers now. The cold had crept into my bones, and for a second, I thought it was all a dream. But then I saw them. She was lying on her side, her breathing shallow, labored. The cub was curled up tightly against her chest. But this time, when I knelt down beside them, he looked up at me. He didn't flinch, didn't back away. Instead, he crawled over slowly and climbed into my lap, just like that, as if he understood I was trying. I held him there, my hands shaking not from the cold but from something else. A feeling I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Like I mattered. Like I wasn't just existing up in these mountains, waiting to die. She didn't stir. I touched her paw. It was cold. Too cold. Come on, I said softly. You didn't drag yourself through that storm just to quit now. No response. I wrapped more blankets around her, fed the fire again, boiled water on the stove, did everything I could think of. But I knew this was as far as we could go. Unless there was a wildlife rehab center about 70 miles southeast, past the old quarry road. They specialized in large mammals. I hadn't been there in years, but I knew the woman who ran it. Her name was Liz, tough as nails, the kind of person who'd risk her neck for an injured coyote, let alone a bear. Problem was, that road was barely passable in good weather, and spring wasn't finished being cruel. But I had no choice. I carried the cub first. He stayed close, trembling but alert. I secured him in the truck with blankets, then returned for his mother. She didn't move when I lifted her. Her body was limp, but warm, still breathing. That had to count for something. The road out of the ranger station was slick with fresh snow. I drove slow, hands clenched on the wheel, heart pounding every time the tires slid just a little too far to the side. The cub cried once. A short, sharp sound. I looked in the mirror. He was watching me, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Halfway down the pass, I hit the brakes. A fallen tree blocked the road. Of course, I muttered. I got out, axe in hand, and started chopping. The wood was frozen, the blade dull. Took forever. I kept looking back at the truck, at her still form in the back, at the cub now pressed against the window. Finally, I cleared enough to get by. I climbed back in, sweat freezing on my neck. Hang on, I whispered. Almost there, but almost wasn't close enough. About 10 miles from the center, just as the road turned narrow between two cliffs, I saw the other truck. Big, red, barreling downhill too fast. I pulled to the shoulder, but it skidded. I had seconds. I yanked the wheel, shouted without thinking. The world spun. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The truck rolled once, maybe twice. Then silence. When I came to, my arm was pinned. Blood in my mouth. Pain everywhere. But the cub was crying. Somewhere behind me, I kicked the door. It didn't budge. I kicked again. And again. It burst open. I crawled out. My leg buckled, but I didn't stop. The tarp had flown off. She was still in the bed. Still breathing. The cub was half under her, whimpering. I pulled him out first. Held him close. Then I saw the other driver. He was climbing out, yelling, cursing. Then he stopped. Saw the bear. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. "Call Liz Carter," I said. "Rehab center. Now." He hesitated. Looked at the cub in my arms. And to my shock, he pulled out his phone. "Liz? Yeah, it's Kevin. I got a situation. No, you need to come now." He handed me a blanket. Helped me get her onto the ground as gently as we could. 20 minutes later, headlights appeared. Liz arrived in a green Jeep, mud all up the sides. She jumped out and didn't say a word. Just started working. She looked at me once, eyes soft. "You did good, John. Real good." I sat down on the gravel. The cub curled against me again. I didn't cry this time, but I wanted to. The hospital wasn't much to look at. Small, rural, 2 floors, and the smell of bleach so thick it burned my throat. I woke up there 2 days after the crash. My ribs wrapped tight, arm in a sling, and a nurse gently telling me to stop trying to get out of bed. I asked about the bear before I asked about myself. "They made it," she said. "Both of them." That was all I needed. The next week passed in a haze of painkillers and short walks with a walker I refused to use. Liz called once. Said the mother was stable, the cub gaining weight. They were safe. "Can I see them?" I asked. There was a pause. "I'll check." But she didn't call back. When I was finally discharged, I drove straight home. The cabin was cold, still smelled of smoke and wet wood. I sat on the porch with the old blanket still carrying a faint scent of pine and fir, and waited for something. A call. A knock. Anything. Nothing came. A month later, an envelope showed up. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a photo. The mother bear standing in a sunlit clearing, her fur thick and shining. The cub beside her, taller now, eyes still wide. And a short note, handwritten in Liz's sharp, slanted scrawl. "Released. Healthy. Strong. You did good. But we have to let them be wild again. No visits. No contact. You understand." I read it 5 times. Then I put it back in the envelope, folded it shut, and placed it in the drawer next to my old badge from when I worked fire rescue. That should have been the end of it. But I couldn't let go. Not because I needed thanks. Not because I missed them like pets. But because I still saw that cub in my dreams, pressed against my chest, tiny heartbeat thudding against my ribs. I still remembered the moment he chose to trust me. So one morning in late June, I packed a thermos and drove. I didn't go to the rehab center. I knew better. Instead, I parked near the old fire trail that curved past the northern ridge. Liz had once said they release animals far from human paths. But I knew these woods. Knew where water pooled and where the sun warmed the rocks in the early hours. I hiked slow. My ribs ached with every step, and my legs still hadn't forgiven the crash. But I kept going. I didn't expect to find them. That wasn't the point. But around noon, I stopped at a ridge overlooking a shallow valley, sat down, drank lukewarm coffee, and then I saw them. Down below, near the stream. She moved first, calm, confident, no limp, her coat thick with summer light, and the cub, no, not a cub anymore, taller now, stronger, but unmistakable. They didn't see me. I didn't move. I watched them drink, play, scratch at a tree trunk. They were free, alive, just as they should be. Then, just before they turned back into the trees, the young one paused, looked up the ridge, straight at me. I froze. He stood there, blinking. Then he rose onto his hind legs, just like he did that first night when I thought he was going to die. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough. They disappeared into the brush. I didn't follow, didn't call out, just sat there until the wind changed and the silence returned. I didn't get to say goodbye, but maybe that's how it was supposed to be. They went back to the wild, and I went home, carrying something I couldn't name, something heavier than guilt, lighter than grief. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was just the quiet knowledge that I did one thing right. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.